Jackson Michael Joseph was born in Gary, Indiana, an industrial town. On August 29, 1958, he was the 8th child in a 10-person family living in a small 2-bedroom home Jackson Street. Joseph, his father, put in a lot of overtime at a steel plant, and Catherine, his mother, managed the household while working part-time at Sears. Multiple siblings frequently had to share beds, and they seldom had enough room to sleep. The house was constantly noisy and packed, and the air smelt of fight. Catherine could play the guitar and had once envisioned herself singing country music, piano, cello, and clarinet. Former boxer Joseph had performed on guitar in either Falcons or a local band. Something about Michael was strange, even as a toddler. Just 4 years old, he would emulate James Brown's moves exactly, whirling over the floor of the living room as family members paused their activities to observe. He did more than dance. He moved as if he were born on stage. Everyone was astounded by his voice. He could, after hearing a song once, commit it to memory and strike the chords that made his older siblings gape in shock. He performed with a talent for rhythm and a sort of sorcery that seemed to be years older than he was. When he became 5 years old, he was doing school performances. Entire classrooms are already rendered silent, displaying self-assurance in front of large crowds as though it were the world's most natural occurrence. However, there was a darker truth hidden behind those early performances. There was a lot of fear in Michael's house. The anger of Joseph Jackson was awful. The kids would hide in corners while he threw furniture during fights with Catherine. That dread is never truly Michael was left behind. His father did more than just yell at him. His sons were exposed to mature situations no youngster should have experienced, taking them into strip clubs and exposing them to things that destroyed their naivete. At one point, Michael acknowledged that he would get so anxious that he would throw up at the sight of his father. That for decades, fear would stalk him. His problems with body image, his uneasiness with intimacy, his intense loneliness. It all began in the darkness of that small home. At the age of 6, Michael took the stage with his brothers in 1964. Local talent performances at Mr. Lie's Club, Climb Every Mountain, which he sung from the sound of music and startled an adult-filled crowd. Nobody could accept AC displaying such emotion and control. He soon transcended being just another group sibling. The people who audiences came to see were him. He played the congas and tambourine, swiftly becoming proficient in all the family's synchronized moves. Practiced. Club owners started asking the Jackson brothers to come see Michael especially. He possessed the sort of audience connection that was impossible to teach. People were drawn to him rather than only observing him. However, that talent came at a terrible cost. Joseph transformed their practice sessions into combat exercises. He would take a seat with Abelt in his palm, keeping a keen eye out for any error. McElrickled being held upside down and struck with belts and cables as penalty. There were worse penalties. At one point, Michael claimed that Joseph would undress, put oil on his skin, then beat him as though to intensify the suffering, worse on purpose. The kids practiced non-stop for hours. The price of deep trauma was perfection. Then the day arrived, when everything was different. The brothers entered Martown's Detroit headquarters on July 23, 1968. Bobby Taylor set up the audition after seeing them perform in Chicago. Berry Gordy had previously refused to sign any more child performers, but he changed his mind after seeing them perform. Simply, they signed with Martown on July 26, 3 days later. Meanwhile, they were still making a living by performing in strip clubs. Michael was just 10 years old, already residing in the world of an adult. The band burst into the scene. Eni Want You Back, released in 1969, was followed by a number of singles such as ABC and The Love F You Save, I'll Be There Too. They were the first band ever to make their debut with 4 consecutive #1 songs. However, while everyone applauded Michael Waslandly suffering, the intensity of the rehearsals increased. His dad made sure that 18-hour training sessions and a flogging for any infractions. Michael stated later on his father would be upset with you if you made a mistake when dancing or singing. These were not isolated incidents, they were part of everyday existence. By 1971, Michael was only 13 years old, but became a teenage idol all around the world. However, he frequently sat by himself in hotel rooms, sobbing rather than partying. He failed tough typical lives of other children, friendships, birthday celebrations, and school dances. Although he appeared to the world as a superstar with a beaming smile, he was really just a boy who was lonely and felt empty. In 1972, everything changed once more. Joseph and Martown were at odds about artistic control. Additionally, during this stress, Michael, being 14 years old, recorded a song named Ben in secret. The ballad was gentle. Concerning a pet rat that was first intended for Donny Osmond. On the Billboard Hot 100, the song peaked at #1, making Michael as the 3rd youngest artist in history to do this. It received a Golden Globe, received a nomination for an Oscar. However, anxiety was raised by the victory. As soon as in 1975, Jackson 5 became aware that they were only receiving 2.7% of their. They departed for Epic Records, who promised 20% of the revenues from Following, they announced their sale of more than 60 million records at a press conference at Manhattan's Rainbow Grill. Departure Motown retaliated, filed a lawsuit against them, and continued to use the Jackson 5 moniker after marrying Barry. Gord's daughter, Jermaine, remained, and Randy took his position. Legal disputes continued up till March 1976. In the meanwhile, Michael's adolescence became even more excruciating. His brothers made fun of his pimples and nose, making fun of his appearance as his body altered and referring to him as Big Nose. It wasn't Ted Stung, it was persistent, and it was only teasing. That, together with the pressure from his father, caused Michael to feel extremely self-conscious about the way he looked. Later on, he acknowledged that a portion of his choice to have plastic surgery in order to remove the features that he and Joseph had in common. The emotional wounds were deep. Michael cracked his nose at the age of 21 in 1979 during a rehearsal for a dance. Surgery was necessary due to the accident, and this was the time that began his extensive career in cosmetic surgery. His initial rhinoplasty failed to proceed smoothly. He had trouble breathing and was dissatisfied with the outcome, which led to further surgical procedures between 1981 and 1983. Every time he attempted to correct one issue, another one arose. In the same year, playing the Scarecrow on The Wiz with Quincy Jones altered his life once more. Critics disregarded their film but gave Michael's performance high marks. His collaboration with Quincy Jones started here. In spite of his record, Michael persuaded Jones to produce his next album despite the label's refusal. Theophile, which was released in 1979, was the outcome, featuring tunes such as Don't Stop Till You Get the Album, Enough, which Michael created himself, permanently altered the pop sound. The picture of Michael wearing a tuxedo and glittering socks on the cover turned into iconic. It was the label that came up with the tuxedo. All Michael did was the socks. At a certain age, at the age of 20, he eventually left his family's house and moved into his own Beverly Hills apartment. He desired freedom and independence, away from Joseph's authority. Michael adopted a pet, which is a strange yet telling detail, rat, and gave it the same name as his last hit, Ben. In fact, he bred rats and kept them in his pockets. To him it made logic, but to others it was bizarre. The rats were misinterpreted, simply as if he were feeling it. The Jacksons eventually acquired complete creative control that same year. Control with their Destiny album, Shake Your Body Down, was co-written by Michael to Randy's song. The Ground peaked at number 10 in the early months of 1979. It signaled a pivotal moment. He was more than just a band's lead singer. He was starting to fully master his voice, his identity, and his creativity. Michael Jackson was already among the top performers in early 1982, world's most well-known young performers, yet celebrity had its drawbacks. Among them, helped to design one of his most famous tracks and accompanied him into the studio. A female had made a fabricated claim to be her child's father, and it really affected him. Heckled and stopped thinking about it, and Billie Jean was directly affected by that fixation. He wanted to tell more than that. His version of events. He desired each sound to be as intense as his. He jumped right into the development of the project with Quincy Jones at his side. Thriller album that pushed for the most cutting-edge 24-track mixing technology available at the time. Each rhythm, each layer, each breath has to be flawless. He started recording at Los Angeles Westlake Studios. The same nervous energy was present when beginning something. Then the time arrived that made all the difference. The music video for Thriller was released on December 2, 1983, fell like a bomb. The production cost of $500,000 was unprecedented. There was more akin to a short film than a dance, zombies and graveyards music video actions that would give a generation its identity. However, not everyone thought it was great. Michael's Jehovah's Witnesses, a religious group, were incensed. They stated it promotes demons and evil. He was instructed to destroy it. He nearly did, but he was stopped by an assistant, who recommended including a disclaimer to clarify that the film did not represent his personal convictions. In the Awake magazine, Michael even issued a public apology, vowing never to repeat that kind of behavior. Even though the video was successful, that particular broke something within of him. Additionally, by 1987, he had strayed from the church in its entirety. A fire broke out a month after the video, January 27 in 1984. Michael's hair was used in a Pepsi ad at the Shrine Auditorium. Ignited by an untimely pyrotechnic blast. He continued to dance. He did not, until others hurried in to extinguish the flames, did he even notice he was burning. He ultimately sustained severe burns to his scalp, and the discomfort persisted. Today was the first day of a painkiller addiction, which would be his new battle for the rest of his life. He was paid by Pepsi, that he gave $1.5 million from the settlement to a burn hospital, which was subsequently given his name. Oddly, he agreed to a new $10 million contract with Pepsi. Later, despite the fact that the event had permanently altered his life, a month on February 28, 1984, following the fire, he entered the Grammy Awards and created history. One night, 8 victories. Thriller was more than just a success. It had required to gout the world. Beat It, one of the album's most popular tracks, featured Eddie Van Halen, a covert weapon. The Stone musician, under two conditions, recorded his famous solo for free. No acknowledgement, no tell his bandmates about it. At first he believed Quincy Jones was playing a practical joke on him. While recording the studio, the volume literally set the speakers on fire. In the end, the song outperformed Van Halen's 1984 album, which contributed to the fuzziness of the distinctions between rock and pop. However, rumors began to circulate despite everything. There were rumors that Michael tried to prevent aging or slept in a hyperbaric chamber. It wasn't tease, but the world was already constructing an imaginary version of him. As pressure surged along with sales, Thriller sold more than 67 million copies. By 1984, no one had ever surpassed that mark. It remained at the top. For 37 weeks that weren't consecutive. However, all of that achievement came with devastating ocean. He purchased Bubbles, a chimp, from a Texas research center. Bubbles evolved beyond a pet. Michael could talk to him. He was someone Yuho didn't criticize or misrepresent him. After catching on to the narrative, the media turned to turning it into a joke. He detested the moniker they gave him. Wacko Jacko. Crazy rumors came after. Bubbles as the ring bearer for Elizabeth Taylor. Prince used deception to drive the chimp insane. Nobody paid attention when his manager tried to explain it. The song was no longer being heard by the world. They watched the circus too much. Michael hoped to be in charge by 1987. He wrote 9 of the 11 tracks on his subsequent album, Bad, himself. People believed that Man in the Mirror originated from his personal humanitarian convictions. However, the reality was, following Quincy, Sierra Garrett and Glenn Ballard wrote it. A group of writers were challenged by Jones to produce hits for Michael. However, there was genuine enthusiasm. For 48 hours at a time, Michael would shut himself in the studio at time, eating and sleeping infrequently. He intended to perform a duet with Bad, the title track, by Prince. However, the partnership never materialized. Among the Speed Demons compositions were influenced by a straightforward traffic ticket that him to be late for a meeting. He made music out of his frustration, demonstrating once more that nothing in his world, every moment has the potential to become a tune. That vitality was taken by the Bad tours and made it a worldwide occasion. Between 1987 and 1989, it shattered every record in sight. It became the second highest grossing tour of the year with $125 million, 10 years. He played in front of 4.4 million fans at 123 events in 15 different countries. He performed for 3 nights in a row in front of 135,000 people in Japan, everyone earning more than $52 million at night. However, things were more sinister. Behind the scenes, Michael was growing more reclusive and suspicious. It was his very first solo journey. He was 29, even though he was already among the most well-known individuals on the planet. The tour was sponsored by Pepsi, but their relationship was already starting to deteriorate. As the tour came to an end, to Guinness recordings, and although Michael was now formally the pop king, the cost was increasing. Then the time arrived that would stay with him forever. In August of 1993, amid his perilous, Michael was charged with sexually abusing Jordan, a 13-year-old child. During the tour, Chandler, according to reports, the boy's father, Evan Chandler, had given him a substance during a dental treatment, and the youngster was accused while under its impact. After renting a car from Jordan's, Michael had first encountered the family years prior. Stepfather, Chandler initially attempted to resolve the issue amicably by requesting cash. The police intervened when it didn't work. The house of Jackson was raided. He searched the body. He was broken by the stress. On the 11th of November, he completed the remainder of his tour, mentioning a painkiller addiction. Early in 1994, the matter was resolved with a $23 million compensation. Michael's defense team, however, maintained that it was not an admission of guilt. The criminal inquiry was closed when the Chandlers ceased to cooperate later that year, but the harm had already been done. 2 years prior to, Michael has released the Black or White music video in November 1991. It was broadcast on simultaneously with 500 million viewers on MTV, BET, and Fox. The video began with a message of solidarity before changing course, in a startling, 4-minute moment in which Michael changed into a panther and danced while violently wrecking cars and windows. He went so far as to mimic sexual motions. The reaction was instantaneous. According to Entertainment Weekly, it was a nightmare. In 2 days, Michael issued a public apology. He later published an updated version of the film that featured he attempted to reframe the devastation as a protest by writing racist graffiti on the glass he destroyed. However, even parts of it had already been censored by the BBC before that. Once more, the commotion drowned out Michael's message. In 1993, he attempted to regain He had an interview with Oprah Winfrey on February 10 that would attract 90 million viewers, making it the most viewed television program in American history. This is the first time that he declared openly that he suffered from vitiligo, a condition that causes the pigmentation of the skin to fade. His physician attested to it, stating that the symptoms had started years prior. Michael admitted to Oprah that he applied cosmetics tablets out his skin tone, which is typical among vitiligo sufferers. The tabloids, however, weren't content. Their possessor claimed to be bleaching his skin white for more than 10 years. In the interview, he made light of the most bizarre rumors are, "I own the Elephant Man's bones. Where am I? Will I add some bones?" He concluded by stating, "I am honored to be a black American." But the tales continued. In 1995, something really eerie occurred. Earth Song, a song Michael was recording, titled What About Us, which he had begun writing in 1988. The tune has undergone years of rewrites, modifications, and various producers. However, something odd happened in the studio that night. He requested that the final voices in total darkness. The room darkened. He was invisible. However, the sound he produced when he began to sing was so intense and unadulterated that it made the engineers shudder. His go-to sound engineer, Bruce Swedian, was present. He selected a unique microphone that evening, an old Telefunin U47-2 microphone he had previously possessed since he wed his spouse. The room was filled with the energy of Michael's voice. Music was no longer the only thing. It was suffering, prophecy, and something greater than both, that turned into the version that would be heard by millions. Later on, Swedian stated, "If you want to feel it completely, turn it up, sit in the dark, and simply listen, don't talk." One day, prior to the 1995 release of Michael Jackson's highly anticipated album History, a storm burst forth. One of the songs, according to an article in the New York Times, the lyrics of Don't Care About Us were anti-Semitic. It wasn't nuanced. Jackson possessed Jewish people sang songs like J. Sue me, everybody do me, kick me, kite me. Communities responded immediately. By now, 2 million LPs had been shipped out when the backlash started. Initially, Jackson attempted to defend the lyrics by stating the purpose of the words was not to propagate prejudice but to illustrate how it feels. However, the pressure continued to increase. News source culled him out. Critics were unreserved. After a week, Jackson relented and re-recorded the vocals, using noise to muffle the slurs rather than substituting them. The damage was then done.